All right, we're going to go ahead and reassemble the G5MR transmission for the Ford ZX2. This is not a 98 transmission, and it's not a 2003. It's somewhere in the middle. And we're actually putting two transmissions together. Our other one is kind of down there. It was used and abused, but luckily it did have an M factory differential in it, which we're going to salvage and throw in this one right here. So I'll just go ahead and get started with the reassembly. So we have everything pretty much apart here except for the detent plate and the reverse gear idler. Now, I mentioned in the other video when we were taking this apart that there's a ball that goes in the end of this with the spring, and it shot off into this. We fished it out. Now, to get the shaft back in, we are going to have to preload this. We're going to have to stick the ball on there and get the spring to kind of go in, and then we'll have to shove something in this hole to keep the spring from popping out, and hopefully the ball will sit in there without rolling out. It may take a few attempts. The other way is to actually pull this roll pin, and then this shaft comes out the end of the transmission, and then this arm just kind of rotates on it. So you'd push that shaft back enough and then put the shaft back in once the gear shaft goes back in. This roll pin is a real pain in the butt to get out, and it's a real pain in the butt to get back in. So I try to avoid doing that if all possible. I'll typically just stick, something small in here after the spring's compressed to keep it from popping back out. And once everything's together, you just pull it out and you're good to go. So first we'll go ahead and start with putting the differential in. So if you want to grab the M factory differential there. So the differential will go in skinny side down, and it'll just plunk right into the top there. Yeah, good deal. Just like that, and it should rotate nice and free in that bearing. Okay, so you will see though that differential kind of overhangs this cup here. So as we're getting the bearing, or the gear shafts in, you can move this kind of back and forth and move it around, but it is definitely recommended to get that diff in before you get the gears all in there. So our gears, just to kind of show you, this is the input shaft that goes into the engine. This one is going to be going down. And then our other one here is going to be going with the threaded side up. Remember, that's to our fifth gear. It's going to be kind of hard to get all these in here like this and get the shift forks in, because these shift forks have to slide in from the front. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to take these back out, and we're going to put our shift forks on there. So here's our shift fork assembly. Here's where that ball actually goes in with the spring, is in these little grooves right here. And our shift selectors, we've got this collar on here. This collar right here. This has a slot in it. That pin that goes from the outside of the transmission has to be lined up in here. This is one of the most crucial parts of the rebuild on the transmission. This collar can move up and down, you can see, but it needs to be lined up with this stationary peg. And basically this is how, when you're shifting, this will rotate in and then come up or down, and then that's how the shift fork will change into different gears, and it'll come over for this one to do this shift fork. That's why it's imperative that this collar stay referenced up and down in the same spot. So this, if you ever need to take this shift fork off, which we did, we're taking this old style one with the little recess in there. These are prone to snapping off, and then you'll get stuck into gear, usually third gear. If you ever do need to take these off, you simply select that, pull it up, and it'll slide right off the shaft. We can put it back on there. And then the shaft will move down. Now, if you ever get this all disassembled and this collar comes off, there are two dots on the top. That goes toward the top of the transmission. So there is a top and a bottom on that piece. And it snaps together pretty much, like Legos. You'll know which way is which. So with our transmission gears over here, we're going to pull those out and put the gear sets on these. So we'll start with this one here. And this will rotate in like this. I'm just going to set it down. And then this gear set, well, it's longer. We'll slide in like this, and then they come together to mesh like that. And then we are just going to carefully slide these in. Oh, And we're not ready to do that yet. I forgot about that ball with the spring. So let's go ahead and get that ready real quick, and then we'll slide this gears in. I got too excited about the gears lining up. All right. So one thing that I've done in the past with this ball is I'll put like anti-seize or grease or something on it in order to kind of keep it on the end there. It's not necessary, but it may help. So I'm just going to push that ball in as far as I can get it. And I'm going to try to, I'm actually going to use a punch instead. A little center punch. I've got, or a pick. All right, just a straight pick. So we're going to take that ball and push it in as far as we can, and then get that pick into the spring. And it should stay just like that. Like I said, a little bit of grease all over this ball will kind of keep it there as well. All right, so those grooves are gonna be going past that ball, and it might knock it out of place, so it might take a couple of attempts to get this right. You wanna make sure your input shaft goes in first. Oh, and the ball fell. I knew it would. We might get a little grease on here. Xavier, anti-seize right there. Thanks. All right. So I'm just going to throw a little bit of anti-seize on this ball. Oh man, I might need to get that spring in there a little further. I'm going to use a screwdriver to push that ball in further. Try to get one more coil on that spring. And I'm going to get anti-seize on my hands, which means I'll need to scratch my nose. It'll end up everywhere. Just enough to hold it into place. That anti-seize will emulsify with the transmission fluid, and it won't cause any damage. You could use gear oil, you could use axle grease, any kind of high quality lubricant. All right, and our bearing cups are sitting flush now in the transmission. And we can go ahead and take our pin out, our pick, and that ball is now in there, in the grooves. It's not going to come out. So now we need to kind of worry about the alignment of the shift collar. So I like to rebuild the transmission in neutral. Just gives you a nice, good reference point to everything. You kind of know that it should wiggle back and forth, and your shift forks should be in the middle of everything. One won't be up and one in the middle. In order to get the car into neutral, though, we will have to assemble that yoke. So I can already see the yoke is going to have to come, or this shaft is going to have to twist a little bit to make the yoke come in. So if we look at the mechanism here, you can see that maybe the shaft is up a little high. So we're just going to tap it down. So if you look at the little grooves where the ball is, it should be in the middle groove. That'll be your neutral position. So now the tab and the shift gates and the collar are all lined up with each other. This little shift collar should be at the top of the shelf of the piece that it rides on the top of. This is the proper neutral position. So this is where we need to be. And now you can see it's kind of facing me, facing the outside of the transmission, and that yoke ball is lined up toward the differential. So we'll go ahead and get the yoke on. And that is this piece right here. Has a area for the ball on the bottom and a ball on the side, and it just kind of rocks into place. Like that. And then there is a shaft that holds it into place. And this is the one that has the O-ring, and it has a little O-ring, and it has a little hole for that pin. Sorry if you didn't see that, the camera was pointed up. But there's our yoke. Slides in like that, and then this pin just slides in all the way in, and then there is a pin that just holds that into place, just like that. So now, if we go over here to where our shifter connects, we will be able to shift this into different gears. So I'm just going to move the transmission. I'm done with this. Just going to move the transmission to where I can get the gears into position here. So right now we're in neutral. So as you know, like in a car, when you're shifting neutral back and forth, you can shift the shifter back and forth. And then you can go into a gear. There's third gear. And right now I'm in fourth gear. So then we come back to the middle. And in the middle you should be able to slide back and forth. There it is. It's a little difficult to do when all of this stuff is free because that reference pin is in the right place holding that collar. But there we can go back and forth. This is what neutral looks like. You can see that little pin goes from shift fork to shift fork, and then it goes over to here where there is none. Well, that's going to be your fifth gear in reverse. So there's 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6, or 5 in reverse. Okay. So we're just going to keep that collar where it is. Now we need to put in reverse gear. So with the reverse gear, we have the idler and the keeper. So this yoke has to go around the bottom of this idler. So we're just going to kind of rock it in here while at the same time lifting the yoke up to get it around that groove. And there we have it. You should be able to do this at the end. And then this needs to point toward the outside of the transmission because there's going to be a bolt that goes in here to keep this in place as well. So the two most important things with lining all these up, make sure it's in neutral. Make sure this is level at the top of that. Everything's good and set. We're in our middle groove, and make sure that is facing out because these are going to be our two places where we're referencing from outside. All right, so we can go ahead and get the upper case on. And what we're going to do with these bearings, we've got a bearing and a shim on each one. We're going to set them up on top here, and these will get pressed into place when we bolt the lid down. You can also put these in on the lid themselves on the underside. They just go right in these cups, these two cups. Sometimes it's hard to get them punched in there. If you're having a hard time getting them to go in, you can pop them in the freezer. Or pop them out and put them on the top of the transmission like this. So as we put this on, you'll see our gear shafts come through the holes. And then the very next thing is this peg, this shaft that has that collar on it. This is where you can really mess up and get things out of whack. So as you're putting the case on, you're putting pressure on the side of that. And that shaft, if it goes down, that collar is going to go down with it. You will still be able to put this bolt in with the pin, and it'll feel like it's in the right place, but it won't be in the groove. It'll be on the top or the bottom of the collar, and you will not have the ability to shift your gears. So one of the biggest things about that coming off is side load. So as you're putting the case on, if you get side load like this, it's going to pull this out of whack. So this has the ability to kind of move back and forth with that lid, and it can pull it out of place. So you always need to make sure you still got your neutral position. And then before this case goes on, we're actually going to put some RTV on this surface right here. That's going to act like a gasket. That's how it comes from the factory from Ford. There is no gasket you can buy. You've got to use RTV. Just put a nice thin bead on and kind of flatten it out with your finger. Don't get it in the holes, because if you've got a hole that doesn't have a a hole on the other side. As you drill that in, it's going to hydrolock and it's going to maybe break the bolt. So make sure you don't get RTV inside there. So we're going to go ahead and just get the RTV on there. We'll cut that part out and we'll come back to when we've got it on and then put the case on. Okay, so we got the RTV on there, and I remembered while we were doing that about that shaft that we took off that goes on the reverse. And that's our extra shift fork. That's our 5R shift fork. That's why it was kind of throwing me off. So this is a 10mm bolt, remember? And we are going to set this in here to where this L is around the peg on the reverse. And then this slides in from the top. And you're just going to want to match up that hole with where the bolt goes in. And this shaft just slides into the hole in the bottom with that little retainer keeper at the top. And then remember that hole up here, that's where the shift fork for fifth gear goes. So we are almost lined up here. There we go. And we got a 10mm.
This is it? No.
I think it was on the electric ratchet.
It's gone.
Oh.
We took it off for some.
It's a 12.
That's not one.
Isn't this always the case? Where's the 10mm?
It's a quarter inch. So
You got a ratchet, quarter drive ratchet?
we did.
Xavier, grab me a quarter drive ratchet. Top shelf.
What's this? Is this? Oh, this is a 12.
Yeah, it's a 12.
13.
Oh. Okay. Whew. Everything's slick right now. Yeah. Not used to using my left hand. Okay. So this will ride on top of that collar. This is part of what gets shifted around and bumps that thing that I was talking about, bumps it out of place. So, got this facing me. It's level. All of the shift gates are lined up because we're in neutral. The reverse idler is facing out toward the outside of the transmission. We are now going to put the case on and hope that everything lines up the first time. So as we come down, we're just going to make sure everything lines up. The first thing to come through is the gear sets, and then that fifth and reverse shaft, and then finally the gear selector shaft. Okay. So what we are going to do is tap this down into place. Like I said, those raised areas are for tapping it down with a hammer, using a dead blow. Sounds like we're already there. You'll see some RTV squishing out. All right, so what we're going to do is we're just going to throw a couple of bolts in here, and we are going to see if our shifting pin is going to be lined up in the right place. So if you want to go ahead and zip these on, and I will get the shifting pin in. Okay, so if we remember, we got our ball, our cap, our spring, our reverse, and our pin. Okay. Pin is going to go in. And I don't feel any resistance. If you felt resistance here, that would mean that it's not lined up with the groove. Now remember, this could also mean that we're above or below the groove. Okay, we're going to put our ball in, and our spring, and our cap. I'm just going to snug these down. We'll come back and tighten them up. Now here's our reverse, and that should thread right into the idler. It is lined up. I went and looked in there. It's just kind of going in a little tight. You got that 12. Here's the 12. Okay. I'll just need the ratchet. It's going in pretty easy. I've just got a lot of transmission fluid on my hands, so everything's slick and I'm not getting a good grip on it. It's threading in nice and easy. Not really putting any pressure on the ratchet. Okay. So we're just going to make sure right now we're in neutral. I can hold the output shaft still. Sorry, this is the output shaft. This is the input shaft. I can hold the output shaft still, and the input shaft, which is connected to a running engine, we'll say, is able to spin freely. This is a good neutral position. So now we're going to go ahead and put it into, let's see, 4th gear. So down here, we're in the neutral position. We can go back and forth. We're going to go straight in. And you notice this rod came up from where it was. So now when we spin our intake, or our, sorry, input, I can't hold the output still. Okay, we're going to come back out and do 3rd. So let's just take a look at that speed. Now it's spinning at a different speed now. And we're back in neutral. You can see this shaft wiggles back and forth. First counterclockwise, then clockwise. That's a good neutral. So we got everything in the right spot the first try. So this is what you're looking for. If none of that works the way you're supposed to, take the idler bolt off, take the cap off, take the spring out, take the ball out, take the pin out, take these bolts out, remove the cap, get everything lined back up into position to where you're in neutral. The collar is at the top of the thing that the collar slides on. All of the shift gears and gates are lined up in the middle together. This thing should be about right there, just about 3/8 of an inch above the deck of the lid once lowered down. All right, so we'll go ahead and get the perimeter bolts in, and we'll torque down these 3 bolts. They don't need a whole lot of torque. I'm not sure what the factory spec is on it, but just, you know, little finger tight will do. And then we'll go ahead and come back to you when we're ready to throw everything up in the top. All right, so one more thing when you're putting this ring on is you're also going to put your motor mount on. So this is a good motor mount with energy suspension inserts. It's going to be nice and stiff. And that goes on these 2 bolts right here around this pounding standoff. Now, these are going to be the longer bolts of all of them. The threaded, welded on nut is going to be on the bottom. And the orientation of this is flat with the bottom of the transmission by the differential here. You don't want it like this sticking down. You want it flat like this. And then this motor mount bolts to that cross member that holds it the front and the back of the car. So we'll go ahead and get this on there as well. We're almost done rebuilding this thing. We've just got to do the top part. One of the things you want to remember that you put on is the reverse light switch. Just remember to kind of thread that in, and remember that is a 15/16 inch wrench. I'm not sure if that's like a 21 or a 23 or something weird. But we'll go ahead and get that in before we forget about it. And this does have like a copper gasket on there, so you don't have to worry about torquing it down too much. You don't want to deform the gasket. Sometimes you can't really, you got to come at it at kind of an angle. There we go. So I'm just going to kind of tap it with a dead blow. And that ought to be good. And then the cable gets held over here by one of those clips. Okay, so now we have the top ready. We're going to go ahead and put the gear set on and the fork and everything, and then we're going to RTV the top, and we should be ready to throw the top then on, and it'll be done. I'll show you how to put the throwout bearing and everything on as well. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is grab our 5th gear. Make sure everything has stayed together. So we got that bearing that goes in the gear. The synchronizer still all together. Got this thrust bearing up there, still looking good. And then our 5th gear and spacer. Just gonna clean this off a little. Now on the 5th gear, the freewheel, this one is just going to slide right over there. And then our spacer goes right over it like that. And what we can do is we can put that bearing on there. And we're just going to slowly, carefully make sure that these come on at the same time. Because if that fork goes on faster or slower, it'll separate the synchronizer. So I'm just going to provide a little bit of upward force, and I'm just going to tap that shift fork in until I feel it slide in. And now I see the synchronizer started to move down. So now I'm going to want to tap the 5th gear down. We're just going to have to make sure it lines up with the other 5th gear. And as soon as I spun it a little to line it up, it went right in. So we're just going to keep just tapping it in without making it go into a different gear. All right, we're hanging up on something. So I'm just going to pull everything up. Make sure we're all good to go still. Everything's still on the synchronizer. You can see those 3 little pins in there in the recesses. They're still in the place they need to be. Everything's good. We may need to bring the bearing up and put it in the gear. That might be what we're hanging up on. You can just tap the fork onto the shaft. There we go. Feels like we are binding on something. The gear is going up and down just fine. It feels like the synchronizer may not be sliding down where it needs to be. This is one of the more tedious parts of putting the transmission together. It does look like we've got a little bit of space there. Remember the double slots, equal sign goes on the bottom. The 3 like a Y goes up on top. I'm just going to slide this on here without the fork and see if that goes on its own. It is still slightly binding. Okay, now it's going into place. It just wasn't lining up on the splines. So I'll put these together. And I'm going to make sure that bottom ring doesn't fall out of place. We just need to line the splines up. And there we go. We're going to put our thrust bearing back on. And everything is where it should be. So just line the hole up on the shift fork with the rod, and then we will put our roll pin in. You just have to hold this nice and steady while you tap it gently in. Ooh. Okay, kind of keep note of where it goes level-wise too. It looks like it's almost to the top of the shaft. Xavier, can you give me a smaller hammer, metal? I think I might have like a ball peen hammer in there that's smaller. Yeah, the small one. Thanks. We'll see if a more delicate hammer helps. I may need to like hold it with some pliers or something. There it is. So now we should be able to shift through the gears. And I'm going to try to hit reverse or fifth gear. Okay, that's reverse, I think. Nope, that's first and second. Okay, so we're gonna come up with this and then in. Okay, we don't have the bolt on, but that would be reverse. And now it's trying to bring the fork down by going with the handle up and back. And I think we're gonna have to get the bolts on there first, or the nuts, before it does that. So we're going to choose out of these two transmissions, we're going to choose the two that are in the best shape. And these are sized. One's fat and one's thin. So one is definitely for a input shaft and one is for an output shaft. So let's see where these divots end up on this. And this is a 32 millimeter socket. All right, and that's good. So let's try shifting that into fifth again. There it goes. It's hard when you don't have the leverage of the shifter. So there's fifth gear. See how the synchronizer went down into place. We'll just get that back into neutral. There we go. So now the only thing left to do is to divot. Just pound a little bit of a flat spot into that. You don't have to have the metal come all the way into the crater, just a flat spot to keep that from twisting at all. So I'll just kind of show you with a hammer here. That's all you need. That's seriously all you need. And then it'll make it easier when you disassemble it the next time. Hopefully you don't have to, but and we'll just come over here and do the same. That's seriously all you need. That'll keep it from twisting. If I put that impact on there now, I wouldn't be able to twist it. That's what you need. And I'm pretty sure my impact driver makes about as much torque as a Ford Escort, so. All right, the only thing we need to do now is put RTV carefully along this. These are the ones that are most persnickety. You've got to make sure that bead goes on the inside. Some of these are real tight, real close to the edge. You don't want the RTV to go inside there. These little tiny 10 millimeter head bolts do snap in half sometimes. If you snap one or two, you can usually still get a good seal. I wouldn't worry too much about it. Otherwise, you'll probably have to drill them out and re-tap or throw a helicoil in there. So we're just going to go ahead and put the RTV. I always recommend actually doing the RTV on the cap, because then you can get it out of the holes. And then we'll throw that cap on there. And we've got an assembled G5MR transmission. All right, so one last thing on this transmission is we're going to go ahead and throw the throwout bearing on. Now this is probably going to be replaced. They've got a new clutch that they're going to throw in there, but I'll at least show you how this goes in. These are both about equally toast. So we have our lever arm here that this throwout bearing is going to go over. And this is basically what pushes in on the clutch to disengage it from the engine. So the other thing that you've got on here is you can see this hole up top. There's a rubber boot. Oh, there's the other boot. Okay, so they got this rubber boot. And that is going to look just like that. It's going to be kind of accordion into itself. And when you look at the arm, it's going to have like a C shape to it, and that C shape is going to point toward the front. So you've got a flap on here that's C shaped as well, if you can see that. So the big fat part out here is going to be the outside. So you want that C shape to go just like that to where it's facing the outside of the transmission. And then you just kind of push this through, kind of pull the outer edge around and into shape. And you can do this with the arm out of it if you like, and then just stick the arm through. All right, so now we've got that arm out there, and this little recess right here is where the slave cylinder, the clutch slave cylinder goes. So now you've got this on here. There's a little pivot ball with a spring on the other side of the arm here. So if we look at this arm, you can see that this kind of springs out around it. So you just want to get this this divot lined up with that hole, and you're just going to push it in. But first we're going to go ahead and get that throwout bearing on there. So we're going to get that on there. And then we are going to get it slid over so that now it's on that fat beefy part, and then just push in, and that's it. Now it's in place. It's that easy.